So yeah, welcome to the last day of the leap year. Today we wanted to talk about the upcoming SmartOS Web GUI. I don't know the official blessed name yet, so I think we'll come up with that and release that when the time is right. But it's kind of a continuation of what we discussed on the last office hours. We talked about there's kind of a change in the landscape here with some things happening in the the corporate space, the landscape, and so the landscape of home labs and small installations, and of course enterprise too, is open to new contenders. And we've had this discussion on Discord in the past few days as well, and we've seen it on YouTube, Reddit, Hacker News and stuff, and of course like on our own Discord, many people are seeking out alternatives to their previously used products. So I've seen a bunch of videos from channels that I watch. They've shown XCP&G, Proxmox, Vert Manager, a few alternatives that are seeing more attention. Obviously, we want to be in that discussion. We've been around for a while. We've been running huge installations, and it's a reliable product, but it's also great for even small stuff as well, and medium size, anything. It scales well, right? And SmartOS and Triton Data Center, they check a lot of boxes for being a great management tool. So, I've used SmartOS. I started at Joyent in 2015. So that's about 9 years I've used SmartOS in one form or another. So I'm not like a too experienced user because I've used it in a few different ways, but I'm not an expert as by any stretch of the imagination, but I use the documentation. I help write some of the documentation as well. But I could always get better at things. And that's what's kind of fun about SmartOS too, is that there's always room to improve. And of course, we want to improve the product as well. But there's some great things that are built into SmartOS and Triton: ZFS, Crossbow, Zones, Beehive, dtrace, all these great, as I call them, Illumos goodies, are all part of SmartOS, and they're big advantages over some of the other systems. And we all know that a lot of people use Linux and that a lot of people are experts at it, but there's just some differences that in the way that Linux was built versus the way Illumos and Open Solaris in the history was built, that there's some cool advantages that Linux just can't go back and do, right? Zones being a big part of that. But on top of that, people do want to be able to run different operating systems. So a lot of times we do have a mix of different things. So maybe you do want to run FreeBSD, or you want to run Linux. You can do that as well with Beehive. So it's a great hypervisor. And so the right tool for the right job. And in this case, SmartOS is an amazing multi-tool that's going to give you the ability to run stuff securely and keep it up and running for a long time. But a little background. So we've discussed a lot of this stuff before, but for anybody who might be new, SmartOS Triton Data Center, it's open source, well supported, fairly easy to get up and running. One big advantage of SmartOS and Triton is running it from a USB stick, but it can also be loaded from a zpool and iPixie booted as well. But just from the experience of running it from the USB stick, it's great because runs in memory, so it frees up your disks for using for your instances, right? And it allows for easy upgrades. Big advantage there. I talked about all the Illumos goodies on the previous slide there. And SmartOS is designed to be headless. Like by default, there's no desktop experience, and that takes up valuable resources. And that should be reserved for your instances. So don't waste any memory or space on this, desktop experience, because you're really just want to get to your instances. Okay, just 1 second here. Is the screen share not updating? Let me double check here.
I see it.
Oh, okay. Somebody commented that maybe it was stuck or something like that.
I can see it just mentioned.
Okay.
When it was like the little like the like the thumbnail view, like with the whole gallery. I don't think it was updating there, but once I tapped on it,
Okay.
I see the current slide.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, if yeah, just click on it maybe if you can. I have it on mine, so if you're viewing this from the video, you will be able to see it. But let me just go back here. Sorry. Okay. So yeah, it's designed to be headless, and then without a desktop experience, everything is done through CLI and APIs. CLI and APIs are fast and efficient. However, sometimes you do want a visual interface, right? Sometimes you do want to just be able to click on some stuff. I know I've had that experience in the past, and we've definitely heard feedback from various people. We've talked about this on previous office hours. In fact, I think maybe like one of the very first ones, we're like, hey, can you have something like Proxmox or like a simple web GUI? And we're like, that would be pretty cool. We didn't have it at the time, but we like, that's pretty cool. Like, yeah, it is a good idea. And we know in Triton Data Center there is an admin web interface that kind of gives you the overview of all your machines, and then if you have the paid support, we have a user portal which you can actually experience on mnx.io. And so that way, like if you are running a cloud, you can have your admin, your operator portal where you can do all the management stuff. And then when the consumers of the cloud, who would be, spinning up their own instances, you give them limits and stuff like that. They could do all that from a user portal. But HTML5 allows for rich desktop-like experiences in the web browser without using too many resources, right? And so that's one of the cool things now is like you can do a lot of stuff in the web browser. Like you can even in like the user portal, you can open up like a VNC console and things like that just from clicking on that. So there's some cool things that the web browser experience has really evolved to be like a full application these days. And so there's some things that you can do with that while not using too many resources. And so enter the web GUI for SmartOS. Like I said, we've heard feedback from users that a visual interface would be useful, and a web console was kind of where we ended up because a lot of others are using that, and that's a great experience, and it's kind of what people maybe expect these days. I know I think a web browser, you go to the port that's opened up and you go there and you can manage your things from a web interface, and you get that experience from a browser. We're always in the browser these days. A cool thing is the web console. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say something there
Sure.
too. When we started talking about this in, I guess it's January or so, maybe it was early February. The the concept here was, aside from making it easier for some existing users, which it's actually done for me, but also the ability to bring on new users with less SmartOS experience, so that they can become familiar with SmartOS. As a building block, sometimes the web UI will be really helpful, getting things out of their way so they can focus on just creating servers, right? Like that's kind of what they need to do, what you need to do or whoever needs to do. And that was the concept we had in mind. This is not a Triton replacement, right? This is a simplified, maybe like an ESXi replacement would be the ideal scenario. But it's a simplified version for ease of management, getting started with SmartOS. And very likely you're going to continue to use command line tools or graduate into command line tools, but this is a jumping off point.
Yeah, it's the like guided instance creation helps a lot. Like it gives new users some structure where going into SmartOS, like before this, is like, okay, you create a VM JSON. Well, what is that supposed to look like? I have no idea. I'm a brand new user. I've never used this before. I've had some like template examples that I keep in a GitHub repo, but that's not always like very discoverable. Even those are linked from docs.smartos.org. A lot of people don't even find that, but having the GUI where you've got a form to input, and then that shows you what the JSON is going to look like, which you can then like customize by hand before sending a provision. I think really helps people get from having zero knowledge into competency in a way that's very natural. So
Yeah, agreed. Just coming from, like I said, my experience of using various different hypervisors and products. So for instance, I had a single server. I used Proxmox in the past, and it was able to see, okay, go into the web interface, and then you're kind of led to creation, right? And that's the experience, like Nick mentioned, for newer users, because I agree that, like for instance, like you said, the when you want to create an instance, now through the CLI on SmartOS, you build a .json file, and there's instructions out there, there's examples. So for instance, when I did it, I copied the example from smartos.org and went in there and just kind of changed the parameters. But there's a little bit of in there that's like, is what is exactly required? Like, do you have to have this field? Do you have to have this, not this field? Things like that. And by having the web interface where it kind of shows you some of those options and kind of shows you what's required, it makes it easier to know, oh, okay, I do need to set that option, or this option needs to be set to that. And so that, yeah, exactly what you said is like for newer users, it will just be a more comfortable experience. And then you can, of course, graduate to the CLI. And the web interface actually helps with that as well, as Brian mentioned, and we'll see in the demo, that it actually gives you the JSON that's built. So you can actually see how it forms the particular VM that you're going to provision. You can look at it in JSON format before you format. You can even add or remove fields in there. And so it's basically this great bridge to showing you exactly what you need to do to get up and running with the machine. Because like you said, Nick, the goal is to, after you get to SmartOS, is to start getting an instance created, provisioned, and being able to use that instance for whatever you're trying to achieve, whether that be a web server or a storage server, a database, whatever you're trying to do. Let's make it easier. And like we said, you can still use those CLIs and APIs along with the web interface to access all the features. Because as you know, right now this is going to be a V1, and we're going to improve on it. But as with many web interfaces, you can always get down to the API.
This is pre V1.
Pre V1, I should say. Yes, thank you. I don't want to. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself and saying V1, but the first iteration, I should say,
Yep.
is that you're obviously going to be able to do certain things, and then as we add more stuff, you're going to be able to do more from the web interface. But you can still go down and access APIs and do different things that, because with a lot of web APIs, like for instance, I do some stuff with like my Roku TV. Like you can do a thing from your remote, but I actually go into the API and I can do in macro stuff, right? So there's still an advantage to using APIs sometimes, that you can quickly do things. But one thing that I actually did do was I built my own web interface for the Roku TV. So you can actually, once you learn this, you can actually, script up some stuff too as well. So there's advantages to doing APIs and doing a web interface. And then, like we said, going forward, a browser experience could potentially in the future even offer SSH or VNC to instances right from the browser. So you can have a full experience. I'm not saying that's in there now, but I'm just saying that the engine is there, and then we can build the car on top of it, and hopefully get a really great interface going that's going to be great for new users, great for experienced users, and just attract more attention to SmartOS, because we know it's a great product. We know it's well used, well built, and we just want more people to talk about it and be in the conversation and use it, and hopefully use it as well in commercial settings as well, because we know it works great there as well. Yep. So let's see it in action. Travis, if you could spin up and share your screen. Let's get to the nitty gritty here.
Yeah, let's see. This is nice. I've never shared my screen before in Discord, so I might have to restart. I just realized.
Okay, no worries.
And
go ahead.
Just to mention also, the goal right now is get this out as soon as possible, and get it in people's hands so we can understand what's missing or what's working or what's not working right away. And that's where we're at right now. I think we're about a month into this project. So Travis and Brian and the rest of the team have Been working hard on it.
It's been great because, you know, we've wanted to do this for a while, and it's been great because, you know, obviously we know what we want to see, but it's also great to get it out there and understand, you know, from another set of eyes. Sometimes it's like peer review, right? Sometimes you might think of something in a different way. Just like even internally when we share things, like somebody's like, oh, how about this or that, right? And so that's what the great part about it is. We have this pre-release, and then we can iterate and make it better as we go. Okay, let me put Travis's screen here as the main on the recording. So don't start just quite yet, Travis. Let me just make sure it's up there. Okay, and just I'm just going to put one note for the recording as well. Travis, okay, never mind. It was saying it's, for some reason the resolution was like quite low. Something with Discord streaming, I don't know, but it's looking good now. So whenever you're ready, Travis, go ahead and present away.
Okay, sure. You guys hear me okay? See my screen okay?
Could you maybe turn up the volume just a little bit? You're just a little bit quiet to me.
Yeah.
I don't see the screen share anywhere. Okay.
Is
I don't
audio
even
better
see
now?
Travis at all.
I see. You don't see Travis. No, there's a. Oh God, you see this? You see the bunch of squares on the bottom. If you. Oh God, where I found it on my squares on the bottom. There's Travis, and then there's a Travis whatever else. The problem
Maybe I should
is.
stop using my iPad.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll rejoin
Sorry.
from my desktop and see if I can,
Okay.
if it's any better. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe I need to get the paid upgrade for Nitro so I can get higher resolution streaming.
There we go. I see it now.
Okay, great. So if everybody's able to see it, we'll go ahead and see the demo.
Cool. And that concludes the demo. No, I'm just kidding. You guys missed it. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and log in. Right now it's using your root password that you set up when you installed SmartOS. It's just reading that from the shadow file, so you can change that at will. I'm running this on a small, it actually used to be a TrueNAS Mini, so it's not very beefy, but works fine, good for testing. So when you log in, as I said, you know, this is a preview version. There's a lot of things we want to do, but we're just trying to get the basics right. So really good interface to VM-ADM and image ADM. So you'll kind of see that. The SmartOS experts will see that reflected here, I think. Typically what you'll want to do when you get started is install an image. I've already got a bunch because I've been testing on this, but I'll import one just so we can kind of see how that looks. Of course, you want to list the available images. I'll grab an Alpine one because they're usually pretty small. And you know, you just import those as you want. That's going to take a while on my very slow connection, so I'm going to let that go in the background. And flip over to instances. I've got a few running on here, you know, mostly for testing and development. But this is where you'll see a list of all your instances. You can go into details and get information about them. Also, we're trying to show that, you know, this is the same thing you get from the command line, so you can view the full JSON properties on images and on instances. We expose that here. So if there's something you're looking for, maybe it's not in the GUI, or maybe it's something we add later and we haven't added to the GUI, you can still get to that information. And my image is complete and imported now. So you'll get notifications when those get imported in the background. So I'll just create an instance really quick using kind of some defaults here. I'm going to create a Debian instance. Let's do VM. It's going to default to Beehive. The UEFI ROM. Going to give it gig of RAM. Let's give it a little more disk. Use root password. Oh, and SSH key. Let me go hunt that down real quick.
And just a quick note that if it looks a little low res to you, we may actually like interlace a higher res version in the edited one, just because I know it may look a little blurry.
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet might just not be beefy enough.
No, it's just a thing with Discord that they limit your resolution.
I'm going to create a Nick. Set up my resolvers. This can take a comma separated list. So I'm going to put my router, Cloudflare, give it a static IP. Prefix. And then at this point, I could click create and it would go ahead and create the instance for me. But I want to show kind of the advanced features too that you can do if you're a little more experienced. So we've got a couple tabs up here. So we've got additional properties and final properties. So if you go to final properties, it's going to validate it against VM-ADM validate. And it's also going to show you exactly what it's going to send to VM-ADM create. This is unadulterated. It's exactly what's going to be sent to it. But as you can see, the guided form doesn't have every single thing you'd possibly want to add here. So kind of as a way to get around that, or a way just to give you more freeform control, you can go to additional properties, and this is merged with the properties from the form. Or you can just override the form completely if you want to just jam JSON in here. You can do that too. For example, I want to add a VNC password to this instance, and we don't have that field. So that's 3. And that'll get merged into the JSON, and that's what'll go into the VM-ADM create. So
the SmartOS savvy folks who want to create SmartOS build zones can use that feature to add FS types that you need the zone to support, so you can build SmartOS. Kind of cool.
Yeah, we didn't want to make the form too overwhelming, and also it's just a lot of conditions based on types and things. Too, so.
Yeah, that's my point. The common case of VM isn't going to be a big deal, but if you're somebody who needs to build who wants this to spit off a SmartOS build zone, you probably know what you're doing already. This takes a lot of the drudgery out of it, quite frankly.
And I was just going to say quickly, in that additional properties, you have a merge strategy, which is pretty cool. So you can either like override something, you can have it added onto it, right? So there's different ways that it will merge if you saw that earlier, which is pretty cool. So there's a way to either override things that are in the form, add things on. It lets you kind of pick and choose that, which I think is a cool feature.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did kind of glaze over that pretty quick. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. I just think it's really cool. I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Yeah. So from here, it's created. I'm gonna go to the instance details, and you get the properties listed here that you'd expect to see. And of course, again, get the full JSON if there's something, we're not going to show, for example, the max shared memory IDs and stuff like that. So you can get that if you need it. Also, we've got VNC working. 3, so you've got your URL handlers set up. You can log in. And
if that's in a different window, we can't see it.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, you have to imagine that there's a VNC window here.
Yeah, but clicking that VNC link does work. So if you have a URL handler for VNC, you click that and it'll pop that open. As Robbie mentioned earlier, like we've been kicking around some ideas of like having an embedded VNC viewer here, having like an embedded serial console access, having like embedded SSH access. So those are things that may show up in the future. Some of it might depend on how easy it is versus how much time we've got, with like other things going on in, like Triton itself.
Yeah. But what's cool is that, Apple, Mac OS has a built-in VNC client with the screen sharing app. And then of course, Linux has most like Ubuntu desktop installations, and most of the other ones come with, obviously come with the VNC client. So more than likely you have a VNC client. On Windows, you'll most likely need to install one, but there should be a URL handler for VNC on Mac and Linux. And for Windows, you might need to install something, but it should work generally.
Yep, and that pretty much concludes, I think, the demo at the moment, unless there's anything you wanted me to show off specifically. That's kind of the traditional workflow you go through for creating an instance anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just the overview is pretty cool. So just for me, it's just seeing like the overview is cool. So like seeing the landscape, the single pane of glass right into your machine is really cool. So knowing what's provisioned, because obviously when you're in SmartOS in the command line, you're going to have to run a couple of commands to see what's going on. With this, you're able to just open it and be able to look, okay, the provision memory, the provision storage, that is cool. Because you have to maybe run a few commands to get that normally. And this just gives you that kind of what's in like the operator portal a little bit for Triton. Like this is the smaller version of it, but just to know what's going on in your machine is really cool. Because like I'm kind of a dashboard kind of person where I like to have just, at a glance, what's going on my machine. Do I need to spin something down? Am I running out of RAM? That's what I think is important for me, at least, as far as when I'm looking like is for the dashboard as an operator or, operating my own little machine here is like, okay, what do I have left? What resources am I running out of? And of course, what machines am I running? So I think that's pretty cool to have that.
Yep. And then the future of the web UI is going to be available on installation. Just like we're doing with package source now, you'll have an option to say install web UI as part of the deployment of SmartOS.
It's likely to come from package source itself, if I remember correctly, unless we've changed our minds on that.
Well, we were thinking about that, but there's we've discovered a couple of like VM-ADM bugs in doing this, like surface areas of VM-ADM that are very seldom used, and so we're trying to think about like, okay, do we need to set a minimum platform version? How can we enforce that with package source? Package source doesn't have a mechanism for that, so we it's currently undecided exactly how we're going to deploy it. So
cool.
Yeah, we'll see. Not entirely sure on that yet.
I have a question from the Peanut Gallery on chat who wanted to hear, wanted to know what this was written in. I answered Rust, and I said Travis can give more details. Don't mean to put you on the spot here, Travis, but there's some folks in the Peanut Gallery who'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's been it's split into two parts. There's the back end, which runs as root and does the nitty gritty of actually calling VM-ADM and things like that. And there's the front end, which is does mostly templating and things of that nature. They're both written in Rust. For the front end, we're using HTMX to do most of the kind of interactive stuff. Trying that out, it's pretty good. And then for the Rust server, we're actually using the Dropshot library from the Oxide folks, which is a very good library. And then we have Tailwind for the CSS styling.
Yeah, and let me just check. Is there any other questions in chat that we? Okay, yeah, we've answered what it's built in. So in the HTMX,
yeah. Jasper feels vindicated. This is good.
Yeah, and it was funny because when Travis was building it, I had someone think about HTMX, and I was playing with like the it's like you can use. I'm trying to think of the feature name, but you can use like headers with HTMX, which is really cool. So there's some cool things you can do with HTMX in using things inside the HTTP headers, which is really awesome because there's a front end tool, but it allows you to use custom headers inside to do things. So like when it has like some of the notifications and stuff, it can pop up like things like when a instance is provisioned and things like that. That's a really cool feature of using HTMX. And then obviously it minimizes the amount of JavaScript that you need to write. So web interface with Nicholas asking, web interface encryption with HTTPS by default.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is just generate self-signed certs on install time.
And then
it would be nice to do like all like let's encrypt right off the bat, but like you need to have a DNS name. and like have that all working. And most people are not going to have that. But yeah, like we're pretty sure we want to have HTTPS like by default, because like Travis said, the credentials here come from the shadow file. So to add additional users, you just add users to your shadow file, just like normal. And there's a SmartOS docs page about like how to maintain additional users, because etc password and etc shadow are on the RAM disk, so they're not persistent by default. But you don't want your root password going over clear text, so that it's snoopable, especially in cases where I know there's a lot of people that run SmartOS in like OVH or like Equinix Metal or something like that, and you're not going to want to have to go like unencrypted HTTP in order to connect to these things. So yeah.
There's a question. Will there be?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
It's using the shadow file right now. I didn't want to have like a separate database or something that had to be initialized differently in order to do that. So could you tunnel the web interface over SSH? You can, like you can do SSH tunneling. So like SSH minus -L, 8080 localhost 8080, something like that. Yeah, that would totally work with or without HTTPS. So, and even so like we're going to do a self-signed certificate, right? So you could trust that outright, or you can also set up Let's Encrypt. I think Triton Dehydrated would just work in the global zone to just drop certs there, and then you can consume those with this thing. We might even be able to have a config where you give it a host name and it'll do a Let's Encrypt certificate like automatically by itself without you having to configure anything. That would be kind of cool. So like it would be self-signed by default, but if you tell it an explicit host name, then it'll just handle issuing certificates right from Let's Encrypt. That's probably like my ideal scenario, but yeah.
There's a question. Will there be cluster management in the web UI?
No. SmartOS is really like a standalone thing. If you want a cluster, now you're talking about Triton, and that's already a thing.
Yeah.
So like if you want to run like a whole bunch of SmartOS nodes, that's what Triton is for. This is not like a replacement for Triton. This isn't like a new direction where this is going to take over what Triton is. No, Triton is the premier product. But I know that there's a lot of people out there who like running SmartOS. They'd like to have an easier management interface for it. And they're running just one or two physical servers, and they kind of feel that like all of Triton is a little bit of overkill for just like the little bit that they're doing. And I get that.
Yeah.
No problem with that. I was mentioning to someone else on Mastodon, like standalone SmartOS instance users are very welcome and a part of our community. They add value to the entire community. It's not like we care about Triton users more than we care about SmartOS users. But when you start talking about like clustering SmartOS, like what does that mean? You're really starting to say like, okay, I want to be running Triton instead of running SmartOS standalone.
Yeah. I will say that there's one person I know who runs multiple standalone SmartOSs because of operational requirements and operational situations where Triton can't work for this person. So they really are enamored by the idea of being able to go to different web pages for each of the standalone SmartOSs and do the right thing there. So there's use for multiple standalone SmartOSs too, but the unit of management for this UI we're demoing today is a standalone SmartOS. And when you get into more, if you want to manage multiple ones on that mythical single pane of glass, you want Triton.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. Like,
Yeah.
There's so much that's already built into Triton that's really heavily optimized for managing multiple instances. So like clustering, like I kind of feel like enabling clustering in this is kind of doing you a disservice of like preventing you from getting to the point where you're running Triton, where you get all of these other features. You get automatic DNS, you get built-in monitoring, you get like platform image management of all the compute nodes. You can like execute commands across all of your compute nodes simultaneously. Just so much like you get fabric networking like built in. End user defined networking all on their own without needing like operators to go in and like provision additional VLANs explicitly on the switches so that stuff can happen. There's so many features in Triton, and it would be like a colossal waste of time to try to shoehorn all of those into like standalone SmartOS in a stripped down capacity.
Yeah.
When Triton is just right there, and it's so easy to use on its own.
Yep. Now, another interesting concept that we talked about was leveraging, this web UI as a testing ground for some newer features that we might be pushing out to Triton. And we may, do some of those things from time to time. But, and if I were to have my list of things that, that would be kind of next in line here, might be, that integrated VNC. And somebody also asked about, GPU pass through. I think I don't know if there's GPU pass through. That might be something that we explore as we, test something here to help us as we push that into Triton as well.
Yeah, and there's a question about HA with ZFS send receive. There is VMADM send receive, which will send an entire zone all in one shot. And that's something that I would really love to support with the web UI, where you could just specify an SSH host, and as long as you have like keys set up in order to do the transfer, then you could just like one click like transfer this VM to that host, and it would just like do the whole thing for you. Like that would be super cool. Like instance migration is a feature of Triton, but it's also a feature of like base SmartOS on its own. And so bringing that feature into the web UI, I think is a really nice fit there.
That's a great idea. I think it would be interesting to hear about, if anyone else has some feedback on, what they might think of as next very important items as well. Would love to hear that if there is anything out there. As we mentioned, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say kind of the guidelines of where the features are is this is a web UI for exploring the features that exist in SmartOS. VMADM send receive is a feature of SmartOS. GP or device pass through is a feature that works in SmartOS. Stuff's not like plumbed all the way up through Triton, but you can do that in the JSON with SmartOS. So that would be a really great feature to be able to make easier to use using the web interface. Stuff like that. So we want the aim here is to make the SmartOS facilities more approachable, especially to people who are not extremely familiar with SmartOS itself. And then the JSON presentation at the end is kind of like gives you that like stepping stone of like, what you want, you do it in the GUI, and then you can see the JSON as the final product, and that like trains you on how to use the JSON, and then you can go deeper directly. Like when you're creating an instance, I think we've got a link to the VM-ADM man page where you can see like all the properties that you could type in by hand. And so like it's really about empowering users on SmartOS as it exists.
There's a question in the chat. Would
Yeah,
that be
there
a
we go.
Would that be a bootless migration of a Beehive zone? Can anyone speak about the pros and cons of rebooting a migration?
So currently, live migration doesn't exist in Illumos. That's a feature that Oxide is really hot to bring into their implementation, and they're doing work in Illumos Gate first. And so once that's working in Illumos in general, then that's something that we could bring into SmartOS. But as it is right now, when you migrate an instance, it's going to stop on one side and start on the other side. So it's going to incur a reboot.
Live migration requires two parts. So we'll get to that in a second. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah. But boot times under SmartOS in general are extremely fast. Quick. And so, you're talking about like you're getting into like negligible amounts of time between a reboot for a send receive and doing a live migration. It's not significantly different there. In a lot of cases, you might have like a network disruption of like 30, 40 seconds, maybe as like a router like renegotiates its link interface with a peer, that kind of thing can happen. And like SmartOS, like instant boot times can be even faster than that, so there's plenty of situations where you get like a transient network outage that are going to be longer than what it would take to reboot a VM. But I understand like totally like everybody loves that live migration feature. And as soon as we can support it, we will, but it's not there right now. And just like speaking from my own personal experience, it's never been like a huge issue with me, like, the small amount of time that it takes. But I also like to design my systems with redundancy and fault tolerance built in. So like losing a single instance of something is not a big deal. I always say like if you build something for fault tolerance, you get downtime for free. So like you can take something out for maintenance without disrupting the system. So yeah, there's both sides of it.
And just a quick comment on like, live migration in general, that, if people are thinking of like vMotion, right? Some of those in the way that they're set up, right, is on a shared storage model, right? So you have the storage is one place, and then in that case, right, when you move the VM or instance to like another place, the storage doesn't actually move, right? It just says, go to this machine, and the storage doesn't move, right? So there's like in that concept where the reason it works in such a way that it does is that there actually is no like send and receive in that case, right? The storage portion doesn't move. It just has the actual VM move to like a different machine, but the storage is like, hooked up through like iSCSI or, SAN or whatever. And it just says, go here now. And the storage never even moved. And so that's like a concept that people forget, that like, that's why like vMotion works in a way that it does. Of course, I'm not poo-pooing live migration at all. I'm just saying like in a concept of the vMotion live migration, that's why it's able to do it in a certain way.
Yeah. And when it does come to Triton, we're probably going to have to necessarily have longer pauses because we need to finalize the ZVol state and the memory state. So we need to like pause, sync both, and then turn it on the other side. And hopefully that's not too much for the system in general. But like, I guess it really depends on how much the guest can withstand, really. So we'll see. It might be something where it's like you do a suspend to disk, you sync the ZVol, sync the suspend to disk state, and then resume on the other side. And that's that takes a bit more time, and it can be more disruptive. So yeah, it remains to be seen like exactly what form live migration will take once it's in Illumos. So.
And then we've got some more questions in the chat. How is Oxide handling the storage move? Would it be possible to set up a temporary NFS transfer scheme? Can you speak of other Oxide features that are on the near-term roadmap?
So like Oxide features, like you really have to talk to Oxide about. Even I don't really know quite what their roadmap is. But they've talked to like, we discussed with them things about Beehive, and we know that they're working on live migration because they've talked with us about it. But they have like Propolis is their Beehive userland implementation. We've discussed internally if we could bring Propolis into SmartOS and replace like I guess zHive with it. That's a possibility. I don't know entirely how much benefit that would give us. If live migration was something that was only available in Propolis, then that would be a much stronger driver for us bringing Propolis in. They have a block storage component, and so like that might be something interesting for us to explore. I'm not exactly sure how that would fit in. Like the block storage component might be a requirement for doing the Beehive live migration. Like I said, we have to see like exactly how these features play out once they're integrated with the system and Oxide is done with it. But like whatever we do, we're going to be using like the Illumos kernel's facilities for doing those things, and we're building on top of that.
Yeah, and just a quick comment too about like the obviously like you mentioned this, they're contributing stuff to Illumos and all that, but just remember like Oxide's thing is they're having a whole giant rack, right? So some of their goals might be different in how things operate because of they're not thinking of either a single machine or some clustered nodes, right? They have like control over everything from the ground up, and that is it's a cool thing, but it is kind of a little bit specialized for some use cases, right? Because you have to purchase like this whole big rack, and it's like open source and custom for all these things. But Triton and SmartOS, right, is used on like, regular hardware. And so there's just some different considerations. I mean, obviously we want to share features back and forth. And I love I worked with the Oxide guys as well. But just remember their goals may be a little bit different in some of the things. And so just kind of, sometimes it might be apples and oranges.
Yeah. Triton and Oxide are, like on the surface they seem like very similar and like maybe in competition with each other, but they are kind of in very different spaces. Oxide stuff seems more like it's aimed at like higher end, like big iron type computing, because you're talking about everything in the context of a rack, and there's like, you can't run Oxide software stack on your own hardware, and Triton is in that niche. We don't do our own hardware. We run on commodity hardware. We run on hardware that you have had for 3 years or whatever. So like we're each in kind of like a slightly different spaces, even though there is quite a bit of overlap. But we still like we're both deriving benefit from the other, like in both directions. They fix things and we take that stuff in, and we fix things and they take that stuff in. But they are kind of a different segment of the market than what we're at, and that drives like some different economics with how they can do things. Like I don't really know exactly how their stack works, but it may be that their block storage component is like pooling the storage across all of the servers that are in the rack, and that's like kind of how they're maybe that's how they're doing the shared storage, so that they can like do the live migration among any of the nodes. And like it may even be a factor of like the live migration is like not even something that you do manually. It just like happens automatically if like one slot in the rack fails. I don't know what live migration might look like going between racks with Oxide. I'm not even sure what the like I have multiple racks of Oxide environment looks like. Is there like one control plane that manages all of your racks now, or is each rack its own control point? There's a lot of things that I don't really know about, like how the Oxide stuff works.
And when we say, and also when to mention too, is like when you say rack, like that's all of the hardware in it. So that's like, the switches, all that stuff is integrated into that system. So like we said with Triton, you would be able, you can use, whatever switch, or whatever, different top of rack switch, all those things like that can be used. Whereas within the Oxide environment, that's all of that, the networking, everything is integrated. So like you said, it's a different way to think about it, where those things are all in one, where, we're coming from that traditional kind of space. Right. So there's just some really different ways to think about it. And like you said, I enjoy seeing what you're doing, but we're also, like you said, not everybody's going to be able to put, a big rack in, and a lot of people still have hardware and are still, of course, are still going to order commodity hardware or regular hardware because that's what they have access to. And so, we have to address that as well. So that's, that's a big difference there. And so that's why this stuff is cool, because, we are going to, get enhancements that we can, kind of mold into what would work for the setup for what Triton data center would look like. And a lot of those guys worked on Triton too, so they understand that. That's why they're doing what they're doing. But we know that there's still obviously a very big need for Triton, and so we'll continue to improve and work on Triton and what we do. So love to them, but
a lot
it's
of
different.
A lot of what's going on at Oxide kind of started as an idea project. At Joyent, there was a proposal for doing basically what Oxide is doing now, and it was like the code name for it at the time was Dogpatch, and reading the papers on Dogpatch that had been written. And knowing that several people who contributed to the Dogpatch documentation are now at Oxide, and even one person who had retired from the industry entirely came out of retirement to work on this stuff because he was all in on Dogpatch. That's what he wanted. He wanted Joyent to pivot to that,
Yeah.
But
we're not trying to bash hardware vendors here, but
yeah, I mean, the rack-oriented model is going to appeal to a particular segment of the market, and that's fantastic. Having stuff like that, it's great that exists, and that it's filling that market need, and being able to do kind of what Google and Facebook are doing with the hyper-converged hardware environments, and they're basically making that accessible to anybody who wants that, and so it's what they're doing is extremely cool, and I dig it a lot, but that model isn't going to make sense for everybody. There's going to be a lot of people who are still buying servers a few at a time, or expanding as necessary, or they don't want their entire future in the hands of one vendor. I understand those kinds of things, and Triton fills that niche on the other side. So there is going to be some overlap with features and behavior between Oxide stuff and Triton stuff, largely because of the shared heritage that we have with the folks over there. Most of them and us are we're friends, and the shared Illumos kernel that's underneath that is the primitives that provides all of these upstack features. But at the end of the day, we're serving different segments of the market, and so there's going to be some features that make sense on Oxide but don't make sense on Triton, and likewise, there's going to be stuff that makes sense on Triton that's not going to make sense on Oxide. So
yeah, and I was just going to say quickly that it shows how great the technology of Illumos is, right, and that it is so flexible and powerful, and the primitives and all the things are so great that it can be used, and like I said, we've seen it scale in different ways, and this is just proving out. And what people have said, I've read comments about us, Oxide, OmniOS, all those things, that this is why Illumos is still around and still great for what it does, because the technology is so great. So that it can fill, from the smallest single server up to rack scale, right? So that's why we still are so confident in the technology and so confident in using it for this purpose, because it is great technology, and that's why we'll continue to work on it. So
and I was talking with somebody on Mastodon a few weeks ago about Beehive, and to my knowledge, Beehive running in production, doing production workloads with mission critical revenue systems on them.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a thing that exists, it's most likely running on an Illumos kernel and not on a FreeBSD kernel. from what I've seen of the landscape, a lot of Beehive use on FreeBSD is like home use or development. Like I don't see a lot of places where Beehive is like the primary virtual machine substrate being used in like large deployments outside of Illumos, and a lot of that happens in Triton. And even some of the FreeBSD and Beehive people were kind of surprised at that. And I was like, dude, like if you know of a large installation that's doing this, like I would love to know about that. And like I'm not saying that like FreeBSD is not a good place to run Beehive. Quite the contrary, it's a fantastic place to run Beehive. But where Beehive is running and Beehive is making money for those deployments, those installations, it's very likely that that's actually running on Illumos.
Yeah, and I would just want to say one more thing too is that a lot of people, there's been like, because I think I've seen some comments on Reddit like, oh, is SmartOS still around? Or people have said in the past like there's been like, oh, Lumos is dead and things like that, and quite the contrary, as we all know because it's in use. But yeah, rumors and conjecture can sometimes take on a life of its own. But this is why, obviously, we're moving forward with the web GUI and things like that because we know it's a great technology, and I would like to see it proliferate more throughout all uses. Of course, more commercial usage, but home use, home lab usage as well. Like I said, there's those YouTube channels where I watch those and I see hardware, and then I see them talking about different software forms, and I'm just like, oh, I really want them to talk about Triton because it is so cool, or talk about SmartOS. And so, sometimes people can read one story on Hacker News or one story on Reddit and think, that Illumos is not continuing or something like that. But no, it is very much alive, as we know. And so this is just helping us to keep the keep our name out there and keep the technology, keep helping people know that the technology is still being improved and worked on, because it is very much great stuff.
I don't know how many years worth of FreeBSD is dead posts I endured on Slashdot, and yet like here we are, and it, FreeBSD is still going strong. So, and touching on another thing that you said, like, we are fully aware that, use of Triton in many cases derives from people originally using SmartOS at home. I started with SmartOS at home. Triton wasn't even open source at the time. There's tons of people who hear about SmartOS and they start trying it out and they really like it, and then they start thinking like, okay, I want to manage a data center with this. I want to start like moving production workloads to this. Like, what does that look like? And like, that they turn their focus from standalone SmartOS to Triton instead. And a lot of the people that do that are very happy with it. So we want this to be something that is approachable to like home users, so that people can like get their feet with it and kind of begin to understand like the deployment workflow, and like be familiar with like how things work in general. Maybe get on the command line and like start understanding like how NIC tags work, how to use DLADM and IPADM, things that are slightly different than the way they work on Linux, and kind of get accustomed to those things and get used to them. And then when they get to the point where they're wanting to run a much larger installation, um, they'll be familiar with us, they'll be familiar with the technology, and they will almost certainly have heard of Triton already. And so that will be something that is like has a little bit more familiarity to them and might get pushed further up on the list of candidates of products they're evaluating for their production use. And some of
Well
those
said.
we're going to be selected. We're going to win those cases. Not all. I get that. People have different preferences, different priorities. But um, uh, people keep telling me on Mastodon, like, "Oh, you need to be advertising more." Like, well,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
advertising costs a lot of money, and getting your stuff like in front of the right person at the right time is not like it's not just as easy as saying like, "Oh, you should advertise more." Um, but um, getting our stuff in front of people who might be interested um, uh, is how we get new users, right?
Yeah.
And so,
And you guys telling your friends, folks. Just FYI.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a lot of scuttlebutt about SmartOS, and we we see new people all the time come in and like ask about it and evaluate it. Um, so like we want it to be more approachable. And like some of those people who come in and they see this, now it's a more attractive product that they might not have, you know, spent as much time with before. Um, some of those people are going to turn into avid users. Some of those avid users are going to turn into Triton users. Some of those Triton users are going to start using it in business and production, and some of those users are going to start paying for support. And this is kind of like this is how open source projects grow. That's how it happened with Linux in the late '90s and early 2000s. It seems right now like Linux rules the world. Well, 2003 and earlier, it seemed like Microsoft ruled the world, and there was no chance in hell that Linux was going to have any significant market share um, in any form or capacity. And yet here we are. You know, um, like I'm not saying that I expect Triton or Lumos to like replace Linux in that aspect. Like ideally, in my mind, there would be a healthy ecosystem where um, Windows, BSD, Linux, and Illumos each have like roughly 25% of deployment share. That's kind of like the best case scenario in my mind is that
Yeah.
there's not a monoculture. There's plenty of um, competition that like spurs on innovation in all of the other parties. Like that's the most healthy situation um, for development and innovation. Um, so that's what I would love to see. Um,
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
part of Linux becoming popular too was like Ubuntu, right, coming out, like because that was one of the first times I installed Linux was Ubuntu on my laptop back in like 2006.
Well,
So
yeah, but like in the early 2000s, there was a lot going on with like Red Hat, you know,
yeah,
and Red Hat was like, the most trusted one
yeah,
at the time,
in
even
corporate
though
spaces, yeah,
it didn't work nearly as well as Debian, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, and like um, on that train of thought, like it would be great because I was talking to someone else on Mastodon about Danube Cloud and FIFO. And I would love for there to be additional products, just like Oxide and Triton, we serve like different segments of the market um, with some overlap, right? It would be fantastic for there to be other other systems that are using SmartOS as a base, that are like optimizing for a different feature set than what Triton is. Like Triton is really oriented at like cloud environments, right? Maybe that's not what someone wants. Maybe they want something that looks a little bit different. And like somebody else who is like taking SmartOS or Illumos and like having their own, you know, maybe like they build on top of OmniOS or something like that, right? And like growing out kind of like different segments of the community that are still using the same base underneath. Like I would love for that kind of thing to happen. I think that would be great for innovation and development. Like unfortunately, Danube and FIFO both look like they have like withered on the vine. I think the last time I looked, FIFO's most recent version of SmartOS that they allow for use is like from 2017 or something like that. And the one that like Danube is using is like from 2021 or something. So like I wish that there was like more healthy usage from like other orchestration systems. You know, I'd love to interface with the teams that are working on those things with like problems that they're having and like solving those in SmartOS. You know, because that would benefit like them, that would benefit us. Like, you know, some of those things like we could bring into Triton. Some of those things we might not, you know. But yeah.
But yeah,
Sometimes it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. So yeah, to kind of sum up a little bit, yeah, the overall goal, like we said, is to get more usage, right? Is to bring on new users, have people talk about this more, and of course, get people using it in more places. You know, so like we said, the goal, get it talked about in those forums, get it, you know, home lab use. Maybe somebody puts it, you know, you said the advertising is expensive, but of course, you know, free advertising where some popular YouTuber or something just features you, not paid, you know, is something cool that could come out of this like, too, right? And so just that natural.
It was always kind of a joke. It was always kind of a joke in like the Linux community that the goal was world domination, you know. And like to some degree, like they kind of have achieved that, you know. Even though like Linux on the desktop is perpetually next year. But like my view of it is more like when Apple introduced the iPhone, they said like, we're looking to get 1% market share. You know, that's a huge success for us, right? They weren't making a product that they expected like everybody, like they weren't out for world domination, you know. But they were like, there's a big enough market here that we can make a really kick-ass product that a lot of people are going to like. And those are the people that we want to serve. You know, there are a lot of people that really love Triton when they see it, like the way it works compared with other systems, like they fall in love with it. Those are really the people that we want to serve first. Like we don't want to try to like sell it to someone who isn't going to like it. But there are plenty of people out there that when they see it are going to love it. We want those sales for sure, you know. So yeah. World domination's not really my goal, but like the people where like their goals and our goals align, that's the sweet spot, you know.
But yeah, like moving forward as we you know, iterate on this, you know, let's continue the discussion, you know, in all the forums, you know, Home Lab, the SmartOS Reddit, here on Discord, you know, once we get it into your hands and others, like, you know, let's talk about what features, you know, we'd like to see, or, hey, how does this work? Or can we do this? Is going to be a big part of us improving on this, is just that discussion we're going to have where we're talking to the actual users on, hey, what do you like to see? Hey, does this work, or can we do this? And so that's going to be a big part of it too, as we're kind of moving towards that. So once it's in, the user's hands, we're going to continue to work on it as much as we can. And, of course, we're going to, like we said, we're keen to add features and things like that. I love this pre V1 already. And so I see it having a really great future myself. Like as soon as we started this, I mean, we talked about it for a while. And then as soon as Travis got underway with like the preview, and I was like, this is so cool. Like just seeing it was like, I just got super excited because I was like, it's already super cool. And I know it's going to be even better as we get moving on, because it just takes a little bit of time to get some, past the V1 and all that. But just what we've got, I think, is really, really cool. And so I'm excited to see what we're going to come up with in the future, and then just hear feedback and what we can add. I mean, I know there's stuff we already know we want to work on, but just to hear the feedback is going to be great, and having, contributions in the future is going to be awesome. So, we'll continue the discussion here.
And despite how well the demo went, like there's still some like showstopper bugs in there that we're working on fixing. But like the future of what this interface looks like is largely going to come from like users as they give us feedback as to like the things that they'd like to see most out of it.
Could
So
you look at
we're
the
looking forward to
dashboard?
that kind of thing.
Could you go
What's
to
that?
the dashboard, please? Could you go to the dashboard? I'd just like to see what it looks like again. Yeah, one suggestion,
Yeah.
if you're looking for suggestions, could you give a list of IPs and like a little button that you click that will instantly copy the IP into the what do you call it? The copy buffer.
Okay, go to the instances tab.
The clipboard.
So we could put the IP address here, like that. I think that might be, or are you talking about like the hypervisor IP address?
No, I'm just thinking like what is one of the most common things that somebody's going to be doing? They're probably maybe want to access one of their VMs, and that means they're going to want the IP. So if you just include a list of
Right.
IPs somewhere that you can just like not even like control C, just you click on it and it copies it into the copy buffer, that would be super convenient.
Yeah, so we would probably put that on this page. One thing about that though is we only know what the IP address is if it's static. So if you do DHCP, that negotiation is going to happen just like between the guest and the network, and so we don't have a record of that. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think IP address or I guess like the first interface IP maybe is a really good idea for sticking on the instance list page.
See, we've already got a suggestion. I like it. Were you going to say something, Nick?
No, I was just going to kind of wrap up my SmartOS feeling. Like, I've been a SmartOS user since 2012. We built MNX.io on top of SmartOS early on after some failed Linux experiments. And I really haven't been a SmartOS user. I've been a Triton user, for the longest time now, and not been using single standalone SmartOS. But this experience has really renewed my the feeling that I had way back when about using SmartOS again. And it's kind of exciting. So we're looking forward to continued development of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel too. It's like coming back to something and it's like, oh, this is so cool. This is what I remember the first time using it, but now it's got this great new feature, and so it just gets you excited again. That's how I feel about it. So
and just the ease of use of it, deployed SmartOS in 3 minutes on a NUC, and had the web UI up and running in another minute, and deploying instances. It's amazing.
Exactly, because that's I think going
back.
I think
Speaking of NUC,
Go ahead.
next week SmartOS is going to have a couple of new going to have a new device driver in it. Thank you, Illumos community. Thank you, RM in particular, that we tested on some NUCs. So the i226 and i225 chips are going to be open for business in next week's SmartOS.
Awesome.
Very cool. Very awesome. Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that, yeah, I'm just going back to the first time I remember using SmartOS. And as we talked about, like, it took me a little bit longer because I had to figure out the VM, JSON thing, all this. That, quick 3 minutes, that could be the most important part of a product, right? Is that first few minutes, how easy it is to use. And that's what we want to improve on. And this is that cool thing, is where you can just be like, okay, it's done, and I can get to provisioning right away instead of having to fumble through a few extra pages. You've got this after you install it. So this is really, really cool direction for us to go. Well, yeah, we're kind of a little bit over time, but that's okay. I think this is a great discussion, and I appreciate everybody joining. Let's continue the discussion through the various channels, especially on Discord, because that's the one I think right now I kind of check the most, that I know we're pretty active on. So continue the discussion. We'll let you know when, we'll be releasing any of the bits to try out. So keep a watch for that. And then of course we'll discuss about us, adding features and all those things like that. Cause that's, we just want to move this forward, get it out there, and then improve. So if you have questions, things like that, just pose them on Discord or wherever you find us. And then we'll have another office hours coming up. We'll talk about, we'll probably talk a little bit about that SmartOS release, like the i226 and i225 NICs and things like that. So there's some cool stuff happening behind the scenes as well, of drivers and things like that. That's exciting as well. So, web GUI and adding more device drivers, things that are just going to improve and make it more compatible and more usable. So we're doing a lot of cool stuff here.
I'll have one ask for you as well. If you're a Triton data center user, we are looking for some more reviews out on g2.com website. So please put a review out there on Triton Data Center if you're a Triton Data Center user. g2.com.
Yeah, we'll post that link in the Discord as well, so you can click on that. So we'll make sure that's available to click on. And so yeah, please do that as well. It just gets us more visibility and gets us, I think it upgrades when we have some more reviews. It will get us more visibility. So please, if you're on there, give us a good review.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'll get to editing this, I'll have to make sure the sound is good. Always have troubles with those sound files, but appreciate everybody's time. And thank you very much. We'll see you on the next office hours. Thank you.
See you guys.